Chapter 3 Secret. Sedith did not like the idea of Ferdinand learning magic, especially anywhere near the lighthouse. Hubert was forced to walk to the nearest sandy beach. Across the bay, the empty church stood with crumbled columns and shattered stained glass. Even though it was completely wrecked, Hubert couldn't help feeling it mocked him. Ferdinand awaited him with his tail artfully twined around a rock. A shallow pool lay at its base. He was finger-combing his wet hair and humming, far too cheerful for someone who'd successfully bargained his way into being taught the dark arts. He watched Hubert scramble ungracefully through the sand in Sedith's two big boots, with an amused head tilt. In the end, Hubert admitted defeat and kicked them off. The sight of his bare feet was truly repulsive, but Ferdinand didn't comment. Once Hubert got closer, the mer dived into the rock pool. A handful of crabs scuttled out of the way of the huge splash. Hubert pushed a dripping lock of hair out of his eyes. He tasted sea foam. "Could you not have done that earlier?" he asked, as Ferdinand surfaced next to him and shook the water from his hair. "Apologies," he said, without looking the slightest bit apologetic. Hubert tried not to notice the attractive shine of his wet skin, or the way it highlighted the muscles in his arms and chest. "I am ready for my first lesson. You realize wielding dark magic is not a game. Dark magic feeds on anything it finds. It can turn on its wielder as well. Perhaps it might be more prudent if I taught you elemental spells. Wind, fire, ice." Thunder seemed like a bad idea for a creature that lived in water. Ferdinand shook his head. "I want to learn your magic. I need something that will scare the merpod if I am to protect the ships." "All you want is to protect the ships? Why? I do not believe humans deserve to die on the whims of mer. The hunting is for sport as much as it is for food, and I find such attitudes disrespectful. There are plenty of easier prey in these waters. Aside from that, I like humans. I like your kindness. I like your stories. I like that you look after each other. Humans are also greedy, corrupt, selfish, and arrogant. We are not always able to protect the ones we love. Your view has been colored by good fortune. Or perhaps your view has been colored by bad fortune." Hubert stopped short. It was true, his very worst experiences weren't down to humans alone. "Very well. I will fulfill my end of the bargain to the best of my ability. Though I am not a born teacher. Do you have maths lessons under the sea? Addition, subtraction, multiplication? I know how to count, Hubert. What does that have to do with magic?" "Dark magic is heavily reason-based, and thus calculus is used to form it. Even learning the simplest spell, miasma, will take time and effort." Hubert used a piece of driftwood to draw the calculations for miasma in the sand under Ferdinand's rapt attention. Given a large part of Hubert's normal duties required avoiding notice, it felt unnatural, but not entirely uncomfortable. "You need to calculate the force here. This part shows you how to move your hands. The inside numbers are for the position of your thumbs. The speed is here. You must be careful to calculate right. Too slow, and the magic will grow impatient and devour your flesh. Too quick, and the spell will not go anywhere you wish it to." They would practice each part separately to avoid disaster. Hubert hadn't learned nearly as carefully. He'd spent months peering at forbidden tomes gathered in a locked corner of the Vestra library, smearing pieces of scrawled parchment with ink-stained fingers before casting his first miasma. The shivering sensation of the spell crawling from his bones. His blood had left him nauseous. When his father found out he could cast, he asked if Hubert wanted to become a monster. Hubert said yes. Monsters were feared, and to be feared was a powerful thing. So, that's what he became, Lady Edelgard's monster. Except now the war was over, and there was no place for monsters. Her Majesty wanted a friend instead. But Hubert the man had all been scrambled up with Hubert the monster, and he didn't know what he was, only that he didn't fit any more. Her Majesty didn't know what to do with him either. Hence, The errand in Morphise. Ferdinand's sloppy form at least provided an entertaining distraction from his darker thoughts. You are not going to accomplish much by firing at the sky. Again. Ferdinand drew in the sand with a fingertip, muttering to himself in a more musical language. He used tallies to calculate rather than digits, which made him painfully slow. Still, he grasped the baser concept faster than Hubert expected. He prodded Hubert for further information every now and again, but most of the time, Hubert sat and listened to him work. Ferdinand's voice soothed his sore nerves. Usually, the feel of the sun on his skin would send him scuttling for the shadows, but now it felt warm and welcoming. He watched Ferdinand carefully to make sure he didn't end up on the wrong side of a spell, or so he told himself. "It is you I hear singing at night, isn't it?" he asked, as Ferdinand finally completed the first equation. He expected Ferdinand to smile, and perhaps act a bit boastful. Instead, he turned away, mouth drawn down. "You can hear me from the lighthouse? My apologies. I did not intend to keep you awake. Very much the opposite. It has been a long time since I slept well. I do not suppose it is magic of some kind? It is not, though I am flattered you think so. I know humans often think we are magical, but it is a rare ability among Mers. I am only blood and bone, much as you are, though I did not think such a song would be much good for sleeping." His fingers falter in the sands, smudging out some of his working. "It is lonely, but it makes me feel less alone. It is lonely, but it makes me feel less alone," is the only way Hubert can come up with to explain it. "Then, perhaps I shall continue to sing it." Hubert felt a rush of affection. "That is enough for today. You made a promising start." Ferdinand smiled dazzled, pointed canines flashing. Hubert blinked, dumbstruck. Not many people smiled at him, and it was wholly different to Her Majesty's quiet smiles or Dorothea's coy grins. Hubert settled into a new routine. He would eat a quick breakfast with Sedith and Flayn, none of them were morning people, and take lunch to have on the beach with Ferdinand. The Mer wasn't tempted by bread or cheese. If there was fish on offer, however, he'd look so longingly the only reasonable course of action was to share. Ferdinand was a good student, though prone to distraction. Sometimes he would catch the noise of the gulls and realize he was missing out on herring. Hubert would be left correcting his working while he nipped out into the sea. Once he returned with a massive bluefin tuna, which he presented to a dubious Hubert. "Get Flayn to cook it for you," he urged. "You will like it." Hubert did like it, though, as he pointed out, Ferdinand would never get the hang of miasma if he was more interested in fishing. Hubert had never given much thought to the sea before, and never had much reason to visit. Mostly, he assumed the coasts were filled with squabbling fishermen. It surprised him to find he enjoyed spending time there, wind in his hair, rushing waves in his ears, soft sand on his feet. And Ferdinand, who taught him the mer names of the shells and the birds, and the times the tide left behind a sheaf of smooth, pristine sand. Hubert frowned at his reflection as he changed his bandages. The wounds were mottled a tender pink, healing nicely. It was the rest of his appearance that shocked him. For as long as he could remember, he shirked the sun in favor of sneaking through the night, but his days outside had given his face a light tan. The other change was his hair, frizzy and unkempt from the salty breeze. He wondered if Her Majesty would even recognize him when he returned to Enbarr. It didn't suit him to look so ordinary. Ferdinand was getting close to successfully casting. As Hubert sat with his feet in the rock pool, he watched the Mer's hands. They were large with water-wrinkled fingers and neatly filed nails. "I have worked out how to do the sums. Why will it not work?" Ferdinand complained. "Your gestures are off by a fraction of an inch. Try again." "I have tried 100 times. Can you not show me?" Hubert considered it. He was still healing, but in his lifetime, he'd cast miasma 100,000 times. What harm could it do him? Very well. He picked up a pebble and threw it into the sea. That is where I will cast. The calculations came easy. A dark circle glowed and blackened the sand beneath his feet. The magic tingled under his skin. Feed me, feed me, feed me. The miasma bubbled through the air in a perfect arc before plunging into the water. Hubert's head spun as he felt a pain in his side, as if he'd run too far for too long. His next breaths came as gasps, while the magic dissipated slowly from his body. "Hubert?" Ferdinand grasped at a handful of his shirt, guiding him to sit down. His warmth disappeared, and Hubert began to wonder if he'd gone to get Flame. Then he felt leather being pressed into his hands, his water skin. He gulped large mouthfuls, while Ferdinand hovered beside him. "Apologies. I may have overexerted myself. I should not have asked you to do that, perhaps. Yet I cannot be sorry. Your skill is extraordinary. I am glad I saved you, Hubert." The words kept replaying in Hubert's mind. I am glad I saved you. To Hubert's surprise, he was glad too. Glad to have met Ferdinand. He used to think it would be an honor to lay down his life for Lady Edelgard, and he'd almost certainly die protecting her in wartime. But they'd both come out the other side. He missed having a clear purpose. His days with Ferdinand had given him something to work towards again. Ferdinand began to cast, hands dancing through the air. It wasn't perfect by any means, but it was enough. The magic came to him, pooled at his feet. Miasma gathered in an uncertain ball before plunging into the sea. Ferdinand's eyes widened, and his hands shook. "How do you feel?" Ferdinand laughed shakily. "I can do it! I cast miasma!" "You did well," agreed Hubert. He did it again for good measure, and was about to go for a third, when Hubert stopped him and, once again, ran through the consequences of overusing dark magic. Dizziness, nausea, skin discoloration, and in extreme cases, scarring. Ferdinand nodded with a serious expression, but Hubert could see his eyes were tracking the gulls, trying to discern if their chaotic formation meant food was on offer. "I will go to the wreck tomorrow and find your warp bottle, as agreed." "Good. Finally." Hubert would miss these long, peaceful days, even as he yearned to return to Lady Edelgard's side. Perhaps, once he was better, he could continue visiting Ferdinand through the use of warp. Would he have time for such an indulgence? He was uncertain. He couldn't make any promises, so he held his tongue. Hubert did not have anything to pack. He bid Sedith and Flame farewell, and assured them their charity would not go unrewarded. "All we want from you is to be left alone," said Sedith, ungraciously.
"Ferdinand will miss you," said Flame. "Maybe you could write to him. Some of the other survivors send letters."
Hubert said he would, but he was lying. The only letters he knew how to write were threatening or coded ciphers. Though, perhaps Bernadetta might teach him. From the top of the beach, Hubert spotted a splash of orange. Ferdinand lay face down on the beach, in a triangle of hair, waves lapping against his tail. No preening, no singing. As Ferdinand moved closer, he hoped it was some sort of ruse, though it would be out of character for Ferdinand. A braying flock of seabirds circled above. They sounded hungry. Ferdinand lay still. Too still. He was usually perpetually in motion. From beneath his hair, crimson streaks licked down his back. Hubert wanted to run, but his legs were shaking, and he stumbled on the sand. This was too familiar. How many broken bodies had he stumbled across before? And now, Ferdinand was one of them. Ferdinand, who always smiled as if genuinely pleased to see him. Ferdinand, who dragged him away from certain death because he'd mistaken Hubert for someone special. He choked down what might have been a sob. Ferdinand lifted his head. You Hubert! His eyes looked fogged, but at least he wasn't dead. I'm sorry. Scratches ran along his body. One of the long fronds on his tail was torn. The puddle of water where he lay was bloody, and Hubert didn't know what to do. He fell to his knees beside Ferdinand. It looks worse than it is. His pale smile tore at Hubert's heartstrings, and he ached to remember the rudimentary first aid he'd learned from Linhart. First, stem the bleeding. There was nothing else on hand, so Hubert tore at his shirt-sleeve with the fruit knife he'd purloined from Flane's kitchen, and pressed the cloth to the worst-looking wound. It ran from the shoulder blade to where the skin turned into scales at his waist. Look at the state of you! You look as if you'd been mauled half to death. I thought... Ridiculous that Hubert couldn't even say it. I thought you were dead. Ferdinand whined, as Hubert pressed down on the wound. There was a reason no one apart from the Emperor wanted to see Hubert when they were sick. He had no talent for first aid. Hubert, you look pale. Are you going to faint? Asked Ferdinand, as if he were the one in need of immediate medical attention. As if Hubert hadn't inflicted worse wounds on every war campaign he'd ever been on. Do not be so ridiculous. Hubert picked up a corner of torn cloth to check the wounds. The bleeding seemed to have waned. Ferdinand tried to lift his torso and let out a hiss, tail flopping on the sand. Wait here. I'll get Flane. No, Ferdinand said, seizing hold of Hubert's arm. I do not want her fussing. The sun shone down, oblivious to the blood-streaked beach and Hubert's panic. Ferdinand's voice softened as he gazed at Hubert knelt beside him, hand still pressed to his back. Are you really so worried about me? He murmured. He touched Hubert's cheek with a shaking, sand-gritted finger. His skin felt cold and clammy, lacking its usual, healthy warmth, and his breath came too quick. A bird with large black wings landed on the sand nearby. Hubert shot a miasma spell at it, which probably wasn't the best idea, but at least it was something he could do. The birds in the air scattered, shrieking indignantly. Ferdinand shivered, despite the sunshine. What happened? Hubert demanded. Ferdinand huddled into his shoulder, fidgeting in an attempt to find a comfortable position. After a minor crisis about where to put his hands, Hubert put a steadying arm around him. Thrashing about likely wouldn't do him any good. I was searching the wreck when the pod found me. They took me by surprise. One of them attacked me, but I swam through the rock bed, hence the scrapes. They attacked you? They would very much like to hunt me and eat my liver. Usually I am quick enough to avoid notice, but I was looking for the warp bottle. I am sorry. It was just poor luck. I heal quickly, so there is no need to fret. Has this happened to you before? A few times. It is getting harder to shake them off. Hubert traced the marks on his back. The fresh crimson glisten of the wounds seemed to be fading. Ferdinand sighed against his shoulder. I do not know why Sedith and Flane dislike you so much, he murmured. You are very kind to share warmth with me. Indeed, how kind am I to send you into danger for my own gain? I wanted to learn magic and bargained with you, Ferdinand reminded him. I did not think visiting the wreck would be so dangerous. I did not even have time to use miasma. If you wanted magic to protect yourself, there are better ways. You should have said so. I have protected myself just fine. Thank you very much. If you think being wounded this way is normal, you are not fine. Come back to the lighthouse and eat something at least. No, do not Tell Sedith and Flane. One worried human with a scrunched-up face is quite enough. Please, Hubert. Hubert took one look at Ferdinand's big, pleading eyes and gave in. What was the matter with him? Her Majesty liked to joke about him going soft in his old age, but he was only 27. What next? Was he going to take up cross-stitch? Start rehoming kittens? I can go back to the wreck and try again, Ferdinand said. I know how much you want to go home. I will simply wait until I am well enough. I see no need to put you in any further danger. Hubert patted Ferdinand's shoulder. He smelled like seaweed, salt and copper. Ferdinand closed his eyes and turned his face into Hubert's neck. I should sleep, Ferdinand muttered. Will you stay with me? Are you sure that's wise? I am not bleeding anymore, and it will heal faster. As long as I am warm, I will be fine. Hubert clicked his teeth, but his irritation was feigned. There are much more comfortable places for you to rest. Ferdinand did not hear, or chose not to answer. His tail curled gently around Hubert's waist, and Hubert didn't have the heart to try and move him. Ferdinand's song helped him sleep. Why shouldn't he return the favor? His heart drummed, not nearly as relaxed as Ferdinand's breathing. A living creature trusting him like this felt utterly ridiculous, as well as undeserved. I'm dangerous, he said aloud, but Ferdinand didn't even stir. Hubert wasn't convinced either. He still wasn't up to much magic, and in terms of raw strength, Ferdinand had him beat. After a while, he calmed and watched the gentle breeze dry Ferdinand's hair into fluffed waves. Hubert had to keep batting them out of his face. He wondered idly if Flane ever got him to sit still enough for a braid. So much long hair surely couldn't be practical for swimming in the ocean. The scrapes on his tail sealed, and the torn frond seemed to be knitting itself back together. When Hubert brushed the frond with his fingers, Ferdinand shifted with a discomforted noise. Hubert's hand slipped to his tail. The scales felt smooth and a little oily. As he smoothed his thumb over them, he felt eyes on him. Ferdinand, awake at last, gazed up at him, long lashes fluttering. How does it feel? Peculiar. You are one to talk about peculiar, being so pointed. Hubert flinched. He was always painfully aware he'd never be handsome. He didn't think it could hurt him any more, but maybe he was wrong. Ferdinand's expression softened, reading him far too easily. I find you fascinating. Ferdinand touched his cheek, stroked a finger along the line of it. The tenderness made Hubert's throat close. He didn't think about kissing Ferdinand. In the breath of a millisecond, he was just doing it. His lips were on Ferdinand's wide, soft mouth, his hand steadying his jaw. Ferdinand made a strangled sound and shot out of his grasp in a flash, tail slipping back into the rock pool. No, 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 no. I am sorry, he said, as Ferdinand swam in a furious circle. You touched my face, and I misread you. Ferdinand hoisted himself out of the water in a single, fluid push. You're a human, Hubert! A human! You've probably laid some terrible curse on me now. You really think I've enchanted you? If I were in any state to do such a thing, I would have gone home. Yes, exactly! You must go home, like all the others. So why have you kissed me? Excellent question. Hubert hadn't calculated it. He hadn't sat down and run the numbers. He hadn't listed pros and cons. It had happened between one breath and the next, somewhere between instinct and reflex. My mother said if a human kissed me, I would melt into sea foam, hissed Ferdinand, patting himself down. The welts on his back had faded into pale pink, and he had more color in his face. At least the rest had restored him a little. I can assure you that was not my intention. So I ask you again, what was your intention? Hubert closed his eyes. I do not know. Then do not come back to me until you have worked it out. Even if I did want you to kiss me, you said before I cannot come to Enbarr. Do not play such cruel games with me. Ferdinand, stop, wait! But he slipped straight out of Hubert's grasp and back into the pool. Hubert fumblingly scaled the rocks, hoping to catch him on the other side. But he didn't surface, and when Hubert spotted his tail again, he was already far out in the open sea.